Hello, my name is Anna Amelia and I'm from North East Animal Rights, and welcome to another one of our Saturday Spotlight interviews. And we're delighted to welcome along Mark Humanity, who is a lifelong activist and author. So welcome, Mark, and thank you very much for agreeing to do this for us.
Thank you.
And if it's okay with you, we'll just go straight to the questions. So the first question I always ask everyone is, can you tell us about how and why you became vegan?
Okay, I think the very origins of the story is probably when I was exposed to comics as a very young kid, when I was about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, sort of. So the comics would slip beneath the strict censorship system of Ireland at the time.
Mhm.
And as a result, if you're exposed to stuff in comics, so at the time there was the likes of Pat Mills in 2000 AD and Alan Moore and all that who were doing comic strips that they were actually quite radical, and it was slipping beneath the radar, as I say, into Ireland. I think that's how how I was exposed to the idea of animals as separate sentient species. So that there was comic strips like Strontium Dog and Meltdown Man and things like this that are really pushed that sort of narrative. And then as I sort of grew older, I was exposed to anarcho-punk and Peter Singer, and
Yeah.
that sort of solidified the thinking that I think was born in those sort of comic strips from a very young age.
Yeah, that's actually quite an unusual route into veganism, isn't it? I mean, it's the first time I've heard of someone kind of like coming through comics.
Yeah,
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 so it's really interesting to hear. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So when I was researching for this interview, I was reminded about how much violence there was in the movement, both
Mm,
perpetrated by and against activists. It seemed
yeah,
to be prevalent in the sort of like the 70s and 80s. So can you
yeah.
tell me how, why you think that was, and how did the political scene at the time amplify the perceived need for direct action?
Sure. I think during the 80s in particular and the early 90s was a time of extreme violence in the animal rights movement,
Yeah,
particularly in the hunt sabotage movements.
yeah,
I think if you were likely to be a victim of violence anywhere in the animal rights scene,
yeah,
it was protesting outside a circus or stabbing a hunt, and they're
yeah,
almost guaranteed at some point to attract violence. So I think the reason that there was an increase in violence during the 80s and 90s is simply because there was an increase in activists around that time,
yeah,
and also I think a lot of those activists came from the anarcho-punk scene, and there was an inherent sort of a sense of direct action and taking on the state or the authorities, and there was a not a penchant for violence, but there was certainly a desire for self-defense, and I think that sort of made itself quite sort of loudly heard during the 80s and 90s, particularly. There was scenes of huge violence between hundreds of activists and hunt, and at any one time in places, so it was quite extreme.
yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there is obviously, I think even now, kind of like the links between the punk music scene and Hunt Sabs and Hunt Monitors and stuff now going on. There's a very
It's
close link, isn't there? Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
It's always been there. Yeah, that's right.
yeah. And we know that that fox hunting still goes on despite obviously the changes in the law. But
Yes.
how does it feel for you to be on the kind of on the right side of the law, if you like? If you like, I mean, what difference has it made?
So I think the principal difference is now a lot of the hunt saboteurs have become essentially hunt monitors,
Yeah,
and they use things like drones to gather evidence of law breaking, and then use that in conjunction with the RSPCA or Protect Our Wildlife or the League
yeah,
Against Cruel Sports to push a case in the courts. So it's changed from being sabotage unless that's necessary to gathering evidence.
yeah,
So that's been a massive step. I would say that the 2004 ban wasn't the end of hunting, but it was probably the beginning of the end of hunting, and
yeah,
it's been dying a slow death ever since, as more and more hunts fold or amalgamate with other hunts. For instance, the hunt that I used to sabotage when I used to live in the UK, the Vale of Aylesbury, folded about 20 years ago, I think,
yeah,
and amalgamated with another hunt that they were folding, and are now sort of a new hunt, which is how they sort of slowly collapse, basically.
yeah,
So the difference has been in the sort of focus, really. So the focus has been on gathering evidence rather than confrontation or direct sabotage as much, I would say.
Yeah. We have three really, really good groups in our area. We have the Teesside Anti-Blood Sports, and we have the North East Hunt Monitor, the Northumberland Hunt Watch. And you're right, it is kind of much more less confrontational and much more about gathering evidence. But we know that it still goes on. I mean, I was reading a hit report from Northumberland Hunt Watch at the weekend, and they were saying that that if they hadn't been there, that they saw a fox running around, in front of hounds, and they know that if they hadn't been there, that fox would have been killed.
Yeah. Of course, yeah, that's right. Oh,
yeah.
they're still at it, yeah.
Yeah. So fox hunting is traditionally kind of like seen as an English kind of sport, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
So what's it like? Is there any comparison over in New Zealand?
There are a few hunts. They're on horseback and they use beagles and they chase after hares, I think, because there isn't any foxes here.
Yeah.
There are foxes in Australia. They were introduced to Australia on purpose by fox hunters in order for them to fox hunt.
Yeah.
Same as they did in the Isle of Wight, but they never did it here. I don't know why they didn't do it here.
Yeah.
But it never actually happened. But there are hares here, and they're considered a pest, along with so many other animals here.
Yeah.
And I think there are 2 or 3 packs, but they're tiny, and I think they're dying out. So there is a lot of duck shooting and deer hunting and so on.
Yeah.
But pageantry, sort of trophy like hunting, the same as you get with fox hunting, is quite rare and very small here, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you've been active all over the UK, including Newcastle up here with the beagle.
Yeah.
So are there any geographical differences between, kind of like where, an island where you've lived and other parts of the UK? I mean, you've talked about obviously New Zealand just now, but kind of, I know you were over in Ireland, in the UK. In Ireland, they've still got the hare coursing, haven't they?
That's right. They've still got the open hare coursing and park hare coursing as well, which is I think it's unique to here now. Maybe somewhere else does it. I think parts of Canada or something like that happens in.
Yeah.
It's been banned in the UK for years and years. So I wouldn't say there's much of a geographical distance. I would say there's a difference in the sort of hunter that you come across. So coursers are probably the vilest scum of the earth I've ever come across.
Yeah.
Next up from them would be terrier men for foxhounds.
Yeah.
There is sort of a hierarchy of sort of scum level in terms of the propensity of violence and the so I would say the worst people to come up against are probably coursers.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure why, but they've a propensity for violence, unlike any other fraternity I've ever come across. But no, I wouldn't say there was any geographical distance really. No.
Yeah. So let's get. I know you've got a book coming out as well. So there's lots of animal rights books out at the moment. I mean, there's some big hitters, like Earthling Ed. So what's different about yours? And what made you decide to write a book? And can you tell me a little bit about it?
I would say the difference between mine and the likes of Earthling Ed is that mine delves into the history, particularly the recent history of the animal rights movement, particularly in Ireland, and a bit of a focus on the UK as well, which is the origins of so much of these groups. The idea for the book came about when I was invited on to a podcast called Police about 2 years ago to talk about my experience dealing with the police in Ireland as a hunt saboteur. And as I was doing research for that podcast, I stumbled across the Irish Newspaper Archive, which is an archive of every newspaper ever printed ever in Ireland since 1783, I think, since the Belfast Telegraph edition, like issue 1. So and they've got a search engine, and you sort of sign up for like a monthly thing, and then you have access to all this information. So I typed in some obvious keywords like animal liberation or animal liberation front or hunt saboteurs, and hundreds upon hundreds of articles were coming up. Small little news things of a vandalized butcher shop to massive page spreads of exposés on the rise of the ALF, and so there was tons and editorials and letters to the editor and all sorts going on. So I sort of figured that there was a book there, and at this stage it was 2022, and then I realized that it was 200 years since the 1822 Cruelty to Cattle Act, which obviously was pushed through by an Irishman
yeah,
Richard Martin. So it also tied in that I could sort of use this 200-year period to explore the evolution of the vegetarian and then the vegan
uh-huh,
movement in Ireland, north and
yeah,
south, from opening up restaurants to direct action to
yeah,
parliamentary bills they were they were pushed through. So Ireland was ahead of the world in so many aspects of this,
uh-huh,
and it was an unknown, or at least unknown to me,
yeah,
slice of history. So I decided this is a really good book, really, and so I wrote it all up, and
yeah.
luckily I got a publisher in Earth Island Press,
Mm.
and it's coming out in 2 weeks' time on December 4th.
So how can we? So this interview, it'll be just about ready to go to a couple of days' time. It'll be available. So how do people get a hold of the book then?
Okay, so they can pre-order if they're hearing it before the December 4th on Earth Island Press direct, and after that it'll be available on Amazon,
Yeah,
Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, all good bookshops
right,
everywhere.
right,
Everywhere you get books, yeah,
right. Excellent. Good,
yeah.
good.
Mm.
Okay, good.
On
So it's a
ebook,
it's a good Christmas present actually for for activists, for those who are kind of the activists
that's awkward.
you know
Yeah,
but yes, so people who want to kind of know about the history of the movement.
yeah,
I mean, it's not like I think a lot of people, especially the younger ones, maybe think that it's just like a recent thing, all this sort of action and
yeah.
everything, but it's been going on for
That's
hundreds
right.
and hundreds of years.
That's right. That's right. And it is fascinating. And even I, a seasoned activist who's been involved in movements since the
Yeah,
1980s, didn't
yeah,
know most of this stuff at all.
yeah,
So it was sort of it was buried in scattered bits of information online in
mm,
different archives, different
yeah,
newspaper things, books here and there. So I sort of gathered all these scattered bits of information into
yeah,
this book to sort of present a coherent narrative, a timeline of
yeah,
events, and it's presented in slightly humorous in points as well. Like
yeah,
it isn't a dry, dour, bleak
yeah. Mm.
sort of thing. It's quite it's quite a kick to it. So
And I suppose it's kind of like showing the positive aspect of it as well, isn't it? It's kind of showing the progress along the way.
indeed,
That
well,
these people kind of like so many years ago were prepared to do to take
that's
these
right.
actions, and they were driven by just doing the right thing.
That's right.
Yeah. There was a Kim Stallwood, who was an activist and writer, an author, and academic. He
Yeah,
did an exhibition in London, which I went to see, and it's kind of like he was kind of like he was showing like articles, and I was quite surprised at how much passion there was. Even a couple of hundred years ago for people,
that's true.
I mean, I would say it's much easier now to be an activist, although obviously the public order bill and everything's trying to make it difficult.
Yeah,
But in that day and age, it was much more difficult because you were kind of like the only person you probably who was doing
that's
that.
right.
Yeah,
That's right. Came across, especially in Ireland, these isolated individuals. A woman called Moira Henry, who was the probably one of a dozen maybe vegans in Ireland at the time, and she was very active in the Dublin Vegetarian Society, and she was the sole sort of representative for veganism in Ireland for many years. And there was a few articles that I stumbled across in the Irish
yeah,
press about her and an obituary and stuff like this. And again, these are people who were quite well known in their day, and then
yeah,
it sort of died out and passes into obscure history and gets forgotten about, and it's all out there somewhere. But
yeah,
unless you deliberately try and track it down and have these leads and these names, then it's dead history really.
yeah,
So it was a joy to come across these people.
yeah. I mean, I think it's really important, like the newer and newer activists and younger activists to kind of to know about the
That's
history of
right.
the movement.
How old it is and how dynamic it's always been and
Yeah,
how radical as well it's always been, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I get the impression that some people think the movement started in 2015 or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Certain documentary like with conspiracy or something like that, which is good as it is.
yeah,
There's centuries of activism. There is millennia of
mm,
activism.
yeah,
If you want to sort of boil it down to sort of the modern day, it goes back a couple of centuries at least.
Yeah, well, that's right. Actually, you talk about millennia. I mean, Jordi Casamajana, he's in his book, he said exactly that, that it's been going on for thousands of years. You know,
That's right.
veganism, we call it veganism, but whatever it was they called it, it has been going on for thousands of years. There's always been people
That's
like
right.
us. I think maybe, do you think it's maybe social media, or do you think it's just because it's more because we are making progress? Kind of what your take on where we are now?
I'm not too sure. I'm not sure if if there's a short-term memory culture, or
Mm,
people are constantly distracted by the here and now,
yeah,
and just and simply don't have time
yeah,
to read a book about history and all that. But I mean, if you go back far enough to uh, Zoroastrianism, thousands
yeah,
and thousands of
yeah,
years ago, even these guys are talking about not animal rights. They aren't using those terms, but a
yeah,
respect and some sort of reverence for these animals. You know
yeah,
that they aren't things. They are
yeah,
beings. You know, so it goes right back. And the modern format is taken as being the sort of moral baseline has been veganism, and we're looking at campaigning and
yeah.
direct action has been a thing. It's sort of been and gone to an extent, or it's been gone and now morphed into something else.
Mm.
Um, but it's always been at the radical edge of society, and it's never been more popular in terms of the diet, the plant-based diet as it's called
Yeah,
now. At the
yeah,
radical edge is slightly being blunted, I would say,
yeah,
but the payoff has been a massive increase in people going vegan,
yeah.
plant-based.
I think, yeah, you're right. I think we always try to remind people that it's not just a diet. It's a much more an ethical lifestyle. It's
That's
about
right.
all sorts.
That's
It's
right.
about vivisection. It's about the hunting. It's
Mm.
about zoos, circuses, and even like the language which I've used over the last sort of like couple of years has changed. You know,
Hmm.
I try not to use animal abuse now. I use animal use. So because we shouldn't be
Right.
using animals at all.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is kind of like it is kind of very, very fluid and very dynamic and kind of
Yeah.
constantly, hopefully pushing forward.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you've probably been keeping an eye on different laws and things in the UK as well, where the foie gras and the live exports and things that are getting pushed back and then they're going backwards and forwards and the trophy hunting and
Hmm.
everything. And it's probably very similar
Hmm.
over New Zealand.
It is
Uh,
the exact same over here. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So what sort of bills and things are kind of going through in New Zealand parliaments?
Okay, so recently, about a year or two ago, you had the Labour and Greens who pushed through a ban on live export, and that was due to come in 18 months after it was sort of pushed through. I think it came in a
Yeah,
few months ago, but now there's been a change in government to National and two other sort of smaller libertarian type parties, and that they're trying to repeal all these green initiatives and animal welfare initiatives
yeah,
as vague and as late in coming as they were. These guys are now trying to push all these things back, so that the farmers are now back in power.
yeah,
The an interesting thing over here in the lexicon of the culture over here is that a farmer refers specifically to an animal farmer, and everyone else is a grower.
all right, right,
So if you farm by growing wheat or barley or whatever else, if you're that sort of farmer, it is called a grower here. Farmers specifically
yeah,
do dairy and meat.
yeah, yeah,
So they even sort of cornered the sort of the word here,
yeah,
and they are overly respected,
yeah,
and they're the leading polluters here by a long shot, by
yeah,
a long shot.
yeah,
And they have a real grip, a real sort of death grip on the politics here, as they do in Ireland,
yeah,
as they do to an extent in the UK. I think it's a bit less in the UK. I've always felt it's probably a bit less there.
yeah.
Um, Landowners for sure, farmers maybe not so much.
Yeah,
You know.
it doesn't feel like it's less over here. It feels like
Okay.
when we're doing the vigils, we're doing a vigil on next week outside of the slaughterhouse. It doesn't feel that way, but
Okay.
I think it's kind of it's one of those things you've got to keep on doing. Partly because it's the right thing to do, but because we know at some point we are reaching people.
Yeah.
So let's go back to your book then. So what's the book? What's your book writing process? How do you kind of like? I mean, and obviously you decided there was a book there in the research you were doing. So how do
That's
you
right.
kind of how did you work?
So what I had to do was to break up the 2 century period into a number of phases or
Mm,
uh, waves, I call them. So I sort of isolated about 5 separate waves.
yeah,
They bleed into each other and they overlap, and there isn't
yeah,
a clear delineation between wave 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 as such, but they sort of come in spurts, and then there's gaps. Like World War II and World War One were big freezing points for all the social welfare and justice movements everywhere around the world for obvious reasons. And then after that, it took a while for society to thaw out and get over its collective trauma, and then these things sort of kicked off again. So Ireland was a little bit late in coming during the 70s and 80s. I would say it was sort of behind the UK, but certainly it was a forerunner during the 19th century, during the early 1800s and all that, with Richard Martin pushing through the Cootes of Cattle bill and things. The only ever known prison specifically for animal abusers was on a tiny island in a loch owned by Richard Martin, that he would personally row these guys out to if he caught anyone like abusing an animal, particularly a donkey. He had the right to judge them and to sentence them, and then to roll them over to his own prison where they would stay for a few weeks and think about their misdeeds, you know. So I've completely forgotten the question, Anna.
It was just about the process of how you wrote the book.
Okay. So as I say, I had to break it up into waves and then isolate sort of the evolution of the culinary scene from the political scene, from the direct action scene, and so on. And then I had to go into the histories and the background of how these different movements sort of were fed, particularly the hunt sabotage and the animal rights movement in the 80s and 90s, and that came from, as I say, the sort of punk milieu, really. So it was sort of scattergun at first, as I was collecting all this information. It was that the internet is just a gold mine for this. It is so easy these days to use, and it's almost free. So it was a matter of gathering all. Spent about a year doing that, and then about a year separated into different chapters and epochs, and then presenting it sort of a complete narrative.
Yeah. So an awful lot of work, really an awful lot of work. But I suppose it must be, it's like a labor of love, isn't it? It's kind of
it was fascinating to the research, and I haven't done anything. I've done a few fanzines 20 or 30 years ago when I was a young punk and all that, but since then, no, I don't have any experience in doing books or anything. But
so you're an older punk now.
I'm an older punk. I'm a balding punk now. I stand at the back these days, you know, like close to the fire exit, you know, in case it kicks off.
So you get out,
yeah. So yeah, it was a pure labor of love. It was a real joy to come across this history that I'm so interested in, and it was just like opening these doors and finding these rooms full of really rich gems of individuals and small little movements that came and went. But before the internet, when everything was analog print media, if you didn't live in the local area where a newspaper was reporting on, a local newspaper was reporting on a specific thing, then it didn't occur as far as you were concerned. You would never ever hear about it. But now, because all these things are archived and they're online, you can actually sort of get these coherent, localized timelines and string it all together.
So what's next for you then? You finish this book, the book's going to go out. So what are you up to now?
I'm going to promote it and see where it goes, and I'm just very excited to have it out there and see if it grows legs and sort of walks around the place. It's going to be interesting to see if it's a success. I've been doing this website of the same name, the humanitytrigger.com, for a few years, and that's been getting a bit of interest. But it's nice to just to throw my hat into the debate, really, and put forward my opinions on this, and also present a very intriguing story and history to people that should be of interest to people inside and outside of the animal rights scene.
So the book is called
The Humanity Trigger.
Humanity Trigger by Mark Humanity, and it's available in all good bookshops all over the place on December the 4th. Okay. So I'll be certainly getting my copy. I'll be getting my copy ordered. And I'll be reading that. That'll be my Christmas read.
Okay, great stuff.
And we'll obviously be doing what we can to promote it as well, because I do think it's really important that people, in the movement and outside the movement as well, but inside the movement, kind of like know the history of
they know where they're coming from
before them.
Absolutely.
People like Ronnie Lane, Roger Yates, who are still doing stuff, who've been doing stuff like all their life, and Louise Ryan as well, and people like that. So it's really, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
Great, that's great, Anna.
Yeah. So thank you very much for giving up your time today. I know you're
Thank you.
12 hours ahead, so
Yeah, it's 13 now. Yeah,
13, is it now?
Yeah.
It's early in the morning here for us.
Yeah, okay.
So I've just noticed that the light's just getting a little bit lighter as I've been talking to you through
Okay,
the.
yeah, it's still on.
Well, we'll enjoy the rest of your evening then, and thank you very much.
Okay, Anna.
I'm going to
Thank
sign
you.
off. So this is Anna
Okay.
Amelia from North East Animal Rights saying thank you very much to Mark Humanity and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.